It's my great privilege to introduce Ken Wiseman, a member of LOPC who served recently as a deacon, and now his wife Rebecca is an elder. She's working on the church officer nominating committee. Their children are Case, as said earlier by Darlene, and their daughter is Vanessa. Ken's the executive director of the Parks Forward Commission. It's an initiative to protect California's state parks. The Parks Forward Initiative is a partnership between the California Natural Resources Agency, and Ken has served on that since 2006 with a group of charitable foundations included. From 2007 to 2013, he was the executive director of the Marine Life Protection Act initiative. These are all long titles, which helped establish a network of marine protected areas. And now that encompasses 16% of our California coastline. Earlier, Ken served as chair of the Board of Governors of the California Independent System Operator, which oversees the management of California's electrical transmission system. Prior to that, he had his own firm which specialized in regulatory and management services related to the environment and to energy and to agriculture. So he's got a lot to tell us today. Your experience speaks for you. Thank you, Ken. Welcome.
Thank you, Judy. I'm not just Case's father, I'm also Judy's neighbor. So that's another important part of being there. Thank you for your interest in parks and Parks Forward. I think most of us will remember back a couple of years ago when the governor suggested that we should shut down 70 parks. And there was quite an uproar. And communities came together in an unbelievable way to save their parks. Because when they asked, why are you shutting down our park, the state could not give them an answer. They could just say, just because. That didn't go over too well. And then as things progressed and the department's budget was looked at, it was revealed that they had stashed about $20 million away that was in a fund that could have been used to keep parks open, which resulted in what I call the troubles, if we put it in the North Ireland perspective. But it was a very difficult time at parks, and people were understandably very angry. The parks ultimately did not close. But communities did rise together and started working for their parks to make sure that they stayed open. Probably the one in the area of the Bay Area that is most notable was the Jack London Park up in Glen Ellen. Was a park that was scheduled for closure, and the community rallied together. The park is now not only open, the attendance and the revenue has tripled since the community got active and involved. So it's a real success story. And at the same time, Sacramento was telling them, no, you can't do it. So this has created kind of the perfect storm for 2 years ago when the governor and the legislature said, we really need to take a look at parks and what is here and what is the future. Where are we going? Where should we go? And that was the genesis of the Parks Forward Commission. I had just finished up with a group of foundations, as Darlene was saying, with the Marine Protected Act, and was approached to say, let's take this same kind of concept where a lot of private foundations will put up money to fund a very transparent and open process to make sure everybody's included, everybody's listened to, but we really examine the problem. And that's what we did. We started with a commission of 12 people appointed by the governor's Secretary of Resources. The 12 people on this commission, very prominent folks in their fields, very independent, all with the common thread of having a passion for parks. And they anywhere from Julie Packard, who started the Monterey Aquarium, to Michael Linton, who is the head of Sony and a big runner up in Santa Monica Mountain Park. He got a little distracted towards the end of our process. He had some issues with his company, but stayed very involved. And we had a group of the dean at Cal Poly, the former head of Vulcan Capital, who's a venture capitalist in Woodside, who's a phenomenal lover of parks. So we just had these people that came together with this real passion of, let's figure out what we need to do. I've done a lot of turnaround situations in the private sector, and I've always found that the place you start first is with the employees, because they're the ones who can tell you what's going on, what went wrong, and actually usually probably give you some of the best solutions because they've been living it. And the employees at state parks were very beaten down by the crisis. They had already been through heavy budget cuts, asked to do more with less, and then to feel kind of betrayed by the fact that money was hidden. Part of the reason, though, money was able to be hidden, which we found out very quickly, was the accounting system for the state is abysmal. It is now I understand why you could hide $20 million. It was the accounting was so bad. We're still working, and that's you'll see one of our top recommendations in our report is to get an accounting system so we can actually tell you how much it costs to run your state park, as opposed to, well, there's $500 million spread between 279 parks, and that's about as far as we can get it. And of course, that's very convenient to kind of keep things fuzzy. But that's not going to happen anymore, and obviously we do not believe people will invest in parks unless they can really understand what they cost and how the money is being spent. So that was one of our first tasks, we brought in some forensic accountants to look at the system who told us that it was one of the worst they'd ever seen, and they could not get the information they really needed to even give a basic report. So we kind of started with that disturbing news. But this also got the attention of our commission, because these are people who are used to getting answers, and most of them realized that their time commitment had just about doubled or tripled because there was more information that needed to be gotten. And we did this not only in focus groups and meetings with employees and management, but also reaching out to the public. At the same time, we commissioned research to say, what is it that people think of parks now and in the future? And what should we be paying attention to? The meetings with the employees were most interesting. And again, they knew what the problem was. They knew the answers more than just give us money, but like give us an accounting system that works. See if we can do something other than paper time cards. See if we could take credit cards instead of do everything cash. These were all things that had been happening since the 60s and hadn't been changed. So the state had not invested in the business and it had complicated things. And then through our boom and bust California economy, huge cuts that the first thing you take out is the training programs, the hiring programs. And so all the things that build a strong and robust organization were missing. And the employees told us that. And they also said that because of funding, the only people that really got funded were law enforcement, and thus the culture and management of parks had evolved to where you didn't get into top management unless you carried a gun. And if you wanted to be in top management, you needed to carry a gun. And that had created quite a divide in the park system. And it's nothing against law enforcement or the importance of law enforcement as part of any organization, whether it's your city or your county or your state. But it had gotten to the point that only law enforcement had opportunity. So if you were a landscape architect or a scientist or an accountant, you left. And that was one thing we found, was that people were not staying because they did not feel they had opportunity to grow in the organization. So again, another really difficult problem because good people were leaving. The other problem with law enforcement is they usually retire at 55. So you had a culture that was, when people were at their best, they were leaving and taking other jobs. So that became a real focus, and you'll see that in our report. We've addressed that, and probably in the next couple of months you will be hearing some announcements from the governor about some changes in personnel policies that would allow us to get superintendents that even could include people like yourselves who are outside the department, because we are working at changing personnel rules that were so limiting in that regard. That was probably the biggest challenge for the employees, and we're working through that. When we went to the public, that was also a fascinating process because people really care passionately about their parks, and they had a lot to tell us. And you hear different things in different places of the parks and the diversity of our state. In Southern California, we had an activist group come to us in Los Angeles and held up a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and said, that's the average open space for a citizen of the city of Los Angeles. That's 122 of us in a garage. And that was pretty compelling, but that became the theme, and you'll see it on our report, is that we, in our large metropolitan areas, we really have underserved communities, population, and it's the future that we have to address, and people are figuring out that without open space, their health is affected, their attitude, and in fact, Dr. Stephen Lockhart, who is the head of Sutter Health's chief physician, who is a member of our commission, a man who's passionate about prescribing parks actually as a prescription to get out and be healthy and fight obesity and fight diabetes. Dr. Lockhart is also an African American and very passionate about the fact that our parks really don't look like our state. Most of our parks often look like most of us in here, older and white. That is not the future of parks. And that's one thing we call out on our report, is that we need to make parks relevant to the population that's coming. And that population is a millennial group, born between 1980 and 2000. Rebecca and I have two of them at our house. And they are the most educated, the most green, the most cynical, the most spoiled, and the least prejudiced generation of all time. And they're going to decide the next 6 presidential elections because they're 29% of the population. They're the biggest group segment of a generation ever. And it's pretty important that we pay attention to who that group is and where they're going, because if we don't, they'll hit delete. Because that's what they do. They're working their computer and they want it to be relevant. As I said, the good side is they don't tend to have many prejudices and they tend to be pretty green. So they're an open slate. But if they don't see it as being relevant to their future, they're not going to invest and they're not going to pay attention. And in California's up and coming, that group, what it's going to look like, according to the research that we've had and what we were able to glean, the park goer in 20 years is going to be a middle-class Latino with a dog who likes to do family activities. And there will be plenty of, obviously, Anglo and other race, but in California, it's going to be a Latino who does not think of themselves as Latino. And that's the other angle, because this coming generation just doesn't see that. They don't care about your race, your sexual orientation, it just doesn't matter to them. And what they care about is connecting, is being part of the environment. And you'll see in our report that we've called out opportunities to do that. And during the process of our, I guess I would call it, our search for answers, we decided to start doing some things that would be examples that would be popular and would show that things were changing. So we collaborated with Google to start mapping trails like they do down our streets where they map Google Home or Google Street. Well, now there's Google Parks in 13 Monterey and San Francisco parks, and hopefully within the next 18 months, all parks. So our millennial kids can go on there, see where they're going, just like they can most other places now, where they might, do they want to go to the water, do they want to go to the mountains, would I go there, and then try to make that a positive experience. We also took an architectural class at Cal Poly with Dean Michael Wu, who's on our commission, and had a competition to say, how could we have a really cool looking cabin that millennials would be attracted to that would only cost $70 or $80 a night? Because our research told us that was the generation, that was that up and coming generation that wants to have an outdoor experience, something unique. Don't need a 4-star Hyatt Regency, just something different, but didn't want to sleep on the ground. And so we had a competition, designed a really cool cabin, and actually may put next year 15 of them on Angel Island as a place here in the Bay where we can encourage people to come and be part of a new kind of park experience. So it was, as we went through this process and talked to the employees, talked to the public, we also talked to a lot of experts, not just the accountants. But we did some fascinating research on who the customer was and what they wanted, where they saw parks going. And these This is a marketing group that Julie Packard actually got to donate $1 million worth of market research, because they do work for her, they do work for Mr. Linton at Sony, they do work for the NFL. They are one of the best. They're headquartered actually out of London. And they came and did research, and they came back to us and they said, this is fascinating. We have never seen an organization that has no brand. And because people don't think of it as a state park. It's a park. It's whether it's a city park or a regional park or a county park or a federal park, it's a park. In fact, if you ask people what's your favorite state park, they say Yosemite. And even though it once was long, long ago, but it's people do not distinguish. It's open space, and that's huge. As the researcher said, for the chance to collaborate and cooperate and manage open space together. So we started asking that question. Well, how are we doing in California on that? I can tell you happily, in our neighborhood, the Bay Area, we do it better than anywhere else in the state. The federal, working with the state, working with the regional, is a model here. We have done some really fascinating and work where economies of scale and trading services and working together. The Redwoods now are a joint state and federal project. It's the national and state Redwood Park, and good things happening there. But in a lot of places, you don't see that kind of cooperation. So that's one thing we call for in our report, is to really have cooperation with the different entities that can work together and collaborate better and ultimately save the taxpayer monies. One of the other things that we learned was that in addition to wanting connectivity in a park, you can get wireless, even though some of us think that'd be just fine if you couldn't get wireless. But this new generation, if they can't connect, they're not going to go there. If they can't take their dog, they're not going to go there. The park user of the future is 2.5 times more likely to have a dog than not have a dog. And we have a grand dog, just newly into the family, but that's a big part of our daughter's life, and that is clearly the future of the park user. Most parks do not allow dogs. And we know in our community we've had issues of on-leash or off-leash, and that's issues at parks or just no dogs at all. And so that makes for a challenging, but something that we need to address. The other two issues that came up that were probably the biggest part of our public outreach were mountain bikers versus regular hikers and how that has changed. And again, the millennials are driving this. The issue is, I want to be on a bike and I want to be on a trail, and that's a huge business. And they are young, professional millennials who are willing to volunteer time to help with trails, and yet the state is not able to harness that and turn that into something positive. Now, in the Bay Area, we are probably the exception. East Bay Regional Parks has a fabulous program with volunteers and people that want to help out. Golden Gate Conservancy and Golden Gate Parks is probably the best in the world when it comes to managing their 45,000 volunteers. They have 8 full-time staff people just managing the volunteers. But they have taken something like Alcatraz, which was kind of a slow tourist attraction, to now a leading tourist attraction, and they generate over $10 million a year, which they plow back into parks, and that's just the tours and the book sales. So huge opportunities, very creative, and what it was that made that come together was basically the attitude of the superintendent of national parks and the head of the Conservancy Friends groups. And they just figured out how to get together, how to partner, how to collaborate. And they are for 20 years, have been making things happen that are just phenomenal. And so we call that out in our report and say, state, you could learn something from this. Look what they do in other places. And we have some of that in the state, too, in the Anza-Borrego Desert, the Santa Barbara Historical Trust, the Friends of Santa Cruz State Parks. There are quiet little pockets of people getting great things done. We also found when we said, hey, can we talk about you? A lot of them said, no, don't talk about us. We don't want Sacramento telling us we can't do that. So we had, again, another opportunity to say, because that's what we found throughout our public hearings, where Sacramento was looked upon, as one constituent said, a place where all good ideas go to die. And so that is not exactly what, sending the signal that we're great partners. So what I'd like to do is play a little video for you, which we did for YouTube, again, connecting with our future generation to talk about, as we got ready to release our report, about what it was that we felt needed to be done. And I'm going to ask Rebecca to pass out some little literature, which I'll kind of go down a list and talk about some of the things that we've come up with. And I think that might help inform some of your questions, which I think will help our discussion as well. But Devin, why don't you go ahead while Rebecca passes that out and run our little video.
Today, our California state park system, which boasts 280 parks covering nearly 1.6 million acres, faces significant challenges, ranging from maintenance needs to organizational barriers. The Parks Forward Commission was created to plan for a vibrant, sustainable 21st century park system. We at the Commission would like to share our plan with you as Californians and ask for your support. We have come up with the best solutions to transform state park management, modernize state park operations, provide access for all, and ensure the long-term sustainability of our natural and cultural resources. We recommend creating a new organizational structure to ensure transparent, accurate, and accountable budgeting, planning, and project implementation, and create a path to leadership for the most qualified and capable employees. We will collaborate with public agencies, Indian tribes, businesses, and volunteers to improve research, restoration, youth engagement, public health, and community outreach programs. To support these new connections, we suggest creating a nonprofit organization to support state parks where it lacks resources, expertise, or flexibility. We recognize that the best way to get more people to understand the value of parks is to get them out into the parks. So we want to expand park access to all Californians, especially underserved communities, urban populations, and younger generations. We call for the development of new digital tools, programs, and transportation options that serve the needs of a broader base of park visitors. We aim to give every Californian access to a quality state, regional, or local park, with activities and facilities designed for the community it serves, and provide opportunities for people to come together in their parks for special events. We believe in a park system that values the state's iconic landscapes, natural resources, and cultural heritage, is accessible to all Californians, and welcomes visitors from around the world, engages younger generations, and promotes healthy California communities. Take a look at our full report and find out how you can help secure the beauty and longevity of California's natural and cultural treasures. Visit us at parksforward.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter at parksforward.
You can see we're trying to engage that new customer. And this, our report, which came out last month, generated a lot of very positive support. I started my career as a legislative staffer in 1972, and I've worked in and out of the legislature since then. I have never seen a group of legislators, bipartisan, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, all wanting parks to succeed, all wanting to support our effort. That's a phenomenal energy in Sacramento that you don't see very often. So we're trying to tap into that and take it to the next level. And our greatest fear is that our report will sit on a shelf somewhere and nothing will happen to it, because that's what the last 30 years of reports have done. So we've set ours up with kind of a timeline, and what Rebecca passed out to you, and I will this is kind of information on parks history, and the back is also where we want to be in 10 years. So we kind of said 2 years is our current active, but in 10 years, this is what we want parks to look at. So you can take that home and along with the executive summary of our report. But what I would put you to, and again, the specifics and the way we're trying to make sure that this report does not get ignored. We have worked with the Parks Department. The governor has put in $3 million in this budget to start a transformation committee. We didn't wait for the report to come out. We worked closely with Parks and the governor's office saying, this is where we're going, let's get this underway. So what you see on this last page are the 31 different projects that are now underway in Sacramento and have a 2-year timeline with the idea that this is what we intend to get done over the next 2 years to start the transformation. And my commission is very determined to come back and say, how you doing? Because we didn't do all this just to have the report collect dust. And so it's really going to be a tense time, I think, in a healthy way, because there are a lot of people that really want to make sure this does not get slowed down or dismissed. And that's a healthy thing. And you can see the major categories here are budget and finance. And again, just being able to tell people this is how much it costs to run your park. Huge, or to take a credit card. When we started our project 2 years ago, there were only 20 parks out of 280 that took credit cards. We're now up to 80 that are taking credit cards, and I think by the end of the year we'll be up to 120. Some of them they don't have phone lines or computer lines because they're out in the middle of nowhere. So, but the Iron Rangers, you remember those? You see like drop your fees in. We're trying to get away from that because half those get stolen. And anything that is all cash tends to be also disappear way too easily. I was working with the Visa people as we were trying to get more cards going, and they said that, I asked her, well, when you start, what kind of revenue difference do they notice? She said the industry average is that when you switch from a cash system to a credit card system, your revenue goes up 30%. Same business, 30% is what was leaking out in an all-cash system. So that's huge. When you have a $500 million budget, 30% looks like a pretty good return on investment. So we're really focusing on getting credit cards and credit card readers in. The human resources, I talked to you about, and you saw it in the video, about a path to leadership where everybody gets included, and you don't necessarily have to be in law enforcement. Modernization, clearly just getting technology. This is where we think the outside entity can help, because the state's processes, by the time you get a bid, technology has already made 2 leaps. So we're looking to the private foundations and to this nonprofit as a place where maybe you can go and get IT solutions quickly. We have Google wanting to partner with the department, and the department took 2 years to analyze the agreement. You know what Google has done since that time? Of course, they gave up on us, and we went back and said, Google, we're going to figure this. We got the contract approved in 3 weeks, and that's why we have 14 parks now on Google Tracker. But that's what has to change in the kind of modernization, so that we can be relevant, that we can talk about getting out to underserved communities, and we've got to have an organization that works, that is innovative. And the subject of partnerships is the key. The current director who I've worked, she's acting director, she came from the Department of Finance about the same time I came into the process, and we were both mortified at just the way that we did not want to do business at parks with people who wanted to help. And so that's, you'll see in our report, really call to change. It says when people want to organize, give you their money so they can save their park, and you can't take it, and you don't want it, this is broken. And so we need to really fix that. So a lot of focus on partnerships and helping the operations. We figure there's about $1 billion in deferred maintenance. And to Darlene's point about most of that is in water systems. And as they have failed throughout the state, and we've shut down parks because of water and sewer systems failing, and of course with all the new conservation that we want to do, a lot of that starts with having top-notch systems. So the governor has asked that the department prioritize, and he put $20 million in the budget just for water systems. And that's where most of it is going, just to make sure that we have efficient water system, because that's a quick and important fix. We also have a lot of natural and cultural resources in the state, buildings that are historic, the adobes, and if you've been up to the Gold Country in Coloma, buildings that are falling down and will never come back if we don't take care of them. And we have people, like they did in San Diego, who want to come in, maintain the building if they can open it up as a bed and breakfast, or get more people to come in. And so we've got to encourage those kind of relationships, which will allow us to keep the parks going. We don't want to make parks into Disneyland. That we heard loud and clear from people that they don't see parks as, they don't want it to be too commercial. And we won't always be able to, quote unquote, break even. There's only 5 parks out of 280 that actually make money, and that's for parking fees at the beach in Southern California. But that in itself is becoming an issue, because if you got to spend $20 to park, are you really keeping people out of the park that can't afford that $20? And so that's an issue that we have to look at. So a lot of it becomes to finding a stable source of funding. We have looked at the vehicle tax, which was not approved by voters last time. You may recall, where there was the idea that $18 of an extra fee and you'd get into the parks, and that would fund parks budget. That did not go over well with the voters, because I think most voters did not see where that was really going to benefit them. So a lot of the future of what we're looking at is, how do we fund parks, not on the vagaries of the general fund going up and down, but with a steady source of income. One of the reasons we have fabulous parks in the East Bay, in Contra Costa and Alameda counties, is because we approved a parcel tax, and each of us pays a few dollars, and that funds the most vibrant and best run park system probably in the nation, because it has a steady source of income. And so we look and say, that's what we need to give state parks. Voters are not going to approve that unless they're confident that it's going to go and be used wisely. And that's why we think these partnerships are important, and we have to make it credible and show that the state can work and communities can work. A lot of people want to give money to parks, their park. They don't want to give it to the state of California and into the Sacramento black box. So that's something we're looking at too, is legislation that when you give money to your favorite park, it stays in your park. Maybe 15, 20% may need to go to Sacramento, but you know that you give $1, it stays in your park. That's not something you can do clearly now, and then we think that's something that has to be brought into the future. So I'm going to stop there. Maybe we'll coordinate some questions and get a little discussion going there. And,
Thank you very much, Ken. That was, frankly, much more informative than I expected it to be.
Good.
No, seriously. I mean, we've had some farm. I'm brutally honest, right?
Rebecca will tell you that she and I operate the same way.
Okay, we have a question here of, how do we get a report copy online that we could refer to others?
Parksforward.org is where you can find it online, just parksforward.org. And I think I guess that I didn't have that anywhere on my, shame on me for not putting that contact information there. But parksforward.org, and it's online in the report. Also, that impacts consulting report, the one that I told you about, the millennials and the brands and all there, that's also online, as well as some of our press releases.
What will the state park system do to better manage our forests? Maintenance of forests has been totally neglected for decades and is one of the major causes of the massive fires that have destroyed the forests of California.
Absolutely. And I think our drought situation is going to only accent that problem. It is very much on the governor's agenda and is forcing the issue, which has always been controversial at parks, management of forest and management of grazing lands. There are those who said don't touch it versus those who say manage it and it'll be better if you graze it or log it. I think the science is pretty much coming to the point that we've got to start managing the forest, because we are creating these huge wildfire potentials that are just uncontrollable. And you go back to the native cultures, the tribal peoples, and we actually had a group of them come out and say, we used to have controlled burns thousands of years ago. It's just what you got to do to make sure the forest stays healthy. So I think that's very much in people's radar, and like anything, we'll probably have a couple really more devastating forest fires before we start really getting focused. But it is definitely on the table.
Do state parks have search and rescue personnel?
They do. They start in with half the law enforcement people in state parks are lifeguards, and they do search and rescue all the time at beaches. And We have response in most of our state parks have limited budgets, so that's one reason if you're a superintendent is law enforcement, they're often involved with search and rescue. My understanding is most of the parks coordinate with their county or regional search and rescue units, and so it is not a separate entity within parks. We try to coordinate. Actually, most parks too have relationships with the highway patrol and the county sheriff, which is one of the things that came out as to why we maybe don't need to have all of our superintendents necessarily in law enforcement. For example, we had one of our hearings that folks from Benicia, the capital in Benicia, was to be shut down. And again, that was one of the communities that kind of rose up and said, no, we're not going to let that happen. And they said, we don't need an armed law enforcement officer. We're a block from the police station. So that was okay. And they changed that and were able to save a lot of money and adjust accordingly.
What is the website number? It doesn't appear to be in the flyer.
Parksforward.org does not come up?
Is that
Not in the file.
the one you just passed out?
Oh. Yeah, okay, no, it's not, and it's not on there, and I'm sorry. I'm going. So when you go to Parks Forward, somebody got their device that's brought Parks Forward up? Yes,
I tell you what, why don't we come back to that
yeah, we'll come back. Well, I want to make sure because it's .org, .com.
I know these .orgs and .coms
yes.
get confusing. We'll come back to that, and maybe I see Rebecca is looking up something on her iPhone there, so maybe that would be. What is the name of the park near Fremont that has the monarch butterflies? It was the best display of monarchs that I have ever seen, better than Pacific Grove. And then goes on to say when they went there. And is that a state park?
I believe it is, and I don't have all 280 committed to memory. But I've heard that same thing about the display there, that it's, and this is an important part that Parks does is interpretation. And that's one of the things that's really been compromised with the budget cuts, is that those kind of interpretive projects, the ability to see museum pieces or monarch displays, things like that, is really an important part of a park experience. And that's been compromised a lot these last few years. And so that's one thing in our report that calls to get that back into the system and make parks more vibrant, because when people understand what really goes on and they understand the historical significance, it makes it more relevant and valuable.
Who has the responsibility for the Pacific Crest Trail?
And I'm not an expert, but that connects a lot of different systems together, because you've got Bureau of Land Management, you've got national parks, state parks, and I believe there's a cooperative agreement. I know there's work going on now to connect Cajon Ranch into that trail, but it varies. It's like in Marin County, you can be over in the park there, Muir Woods, or I think it's in Muir Woods, that you can walk. You're on a county, state, and federal property, and you don't know it. You're going through all three. Yeah, parksforward.com in English or Spanish. So, thank you, Brett.
That's good. Did everybody get that one?
Parksforward.com.
Yeah, parksforward.com. Okay. What can we do to keep your report from sitting on the shelf? Can we help? And do we need to pressure legislators?
We do at the right time. And I think right now, and Lynn and I were talking about this at a Save Mount Diablo breakfast last week, that it's right now the department has said, we think we've got it covered. We can do this. And the legislature is going, great. But in about 6 months, we're going to have to see whether that's really being done and how much is being done. And I think at that time, you're going to see a lot of discussion about, is it enough? Are we moving fast enough? Are we getting enough done? That's when you contact your legislator and say, I want to see this get completed. And it also is, the governor is a very fiscally conservative guy when it comes to spending money. And I worked with him 40 years ago in his first term. And when we were always asking, where's the adult in the room? And now he is the adult in the room. And it's quite an experience. And having started my career working when Ronald Reagan was the governor, and now, through to Jerry Brown, and watching in a lot of fiscal policy, much the same way, kind of saying, okay, how am I going to balance this checkbook, and how are we going to make choices? Although we tend to think of Reagan as conservative and Brown as liberal, they both have interesting similarities, at least from my standpoint. Very interesting men to be around, and very interested in saying, okay, how do we make this work? And so Jerry Brown's going to be real important in the future of how much is invested in parks. And I think that's why most of the people that look at this say there's going to be some kind of an initiative on the ballot. It may be a bond issue in 2016. If we're legalizing marijuana, it may be that a good chunk of that money goes to state parks. If we've got a carbon tax, there's no better place to sequester carbon than in the redwoods. That's where the biggest chunk of it's done. So a carbon tax may be, that may be a way to fund parks. These are all things that are being considered, and the governor will, getting his attention, and I think the legislature will be very supportive of that. The biggest challenge is going to be between urban areas and the traditional area, because there are such underserved areas in the three major metropolitan areas. In 20 years, 76% of us are going to live in three major metropolitan areas: Sacramento, San Francisco, LA, San Bernardino, Orange County, San Diego. 6% is expected to live in those areas. So most of the parks are not in those areas. And that creates a challenge, and that's going to, I think, be some of the tension that happens when we put something on the ballot. For example, in the Bay Area, they will say, well, hey, you've got more parks than anybody. Why should you get any more? And so our opportunity may be more about cooperating and making sure that it's easier for regional parks to work with state parks and get things, because there's a lot of open space in the Bay Area. Take Mount Diablo, that's not been able to be unlocked because the state can't accept it, won't accept it. They say we don't have the money to manage it. Yet it's been acquired and set aside. And that's a real travesty, because that's thousands of acres that could be opened up to trails and hikes and open space. And so I think there may be legislation, maybe language that works to make it easier to unlock those things and figure out how to get them into the public domain and being used in the way they were intended.
Along those lines, are new parks being planned? And if so, do you know where?
They need to be planned. There are, as I said, many parks owns a huge amount of that 1.6 million acres. Not all of it is accessible. I think 300,000 or something is potentially, needs to be developed, needs to be accessible. And there's lots of, whether it's Save Mount Diablo or Save the Redwoods League or Sempervirens Fund, they have a lot of properties that they are ready to put into a park, and the state's just not able to take it. So those tend to be a priority because they're ready to go, but yet we have a lot of Southern California legislators saying, that doesn't help my people in downtown LA. I want an urban park. And so that is a tension that's going to play out, and you will see that coming over the next few months.
What is your thinking about dogs in parks?
I own a dog, disclosure. I'd have her here with me now if I could. But so I'm probably a more pro-dog person. We intentionally did not call it out in the report. The three most controversial things we found in our public hearings were dogs, mountain bikes, and nude bathing. Nude bathing, naturists. Many of our state parks have been long traditional places where it was safe to have naturalists, naturists, is that what it's called? And nude bathing. And basically it was shut down many years ago for enforcement reasons, and actually because in this new generation where all of us are carrying cameras, it's kind of affected the privacy issue. But this was I had one hearing in San Bernardino where 20 folks, that's all. You got to open up our nude bathing. And I had 200 in Santa Cruz that was a pro-dog versus anti-dog. And that's all they talked about. And it's, it's really passionate. I think it's the answer to, and the professionals in the department say, you really need to address it park by park. There are parks where people think, oh, we're out in the wilderness, we can let a dog run wild. Well, they chase wildlife, they do damage. So I think you're always going to be looking at on leash. But we see what they've done at Crissy Field. It's a pretty permissive, progressive policy, and people pretty much work within it. I think we just have to be, personally, I believe we have to be much more dog friendly, because that's just part of our new customer. So that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, one of the questions also was, what do young families want in parks? And you indicated they all seem to have dogs.
They do, and if most families in 20 years in parks are going to be Latino, they want to have a place where they can picnic with a large group, because that is their culture. And we found that when we've taken the few parks that are in the Central Valley and made them family friendly, they are just packed on weekends. And people take pride. They pick up the trash, because this is a place that they can do family events. One of the things that's going on here in the San Francisco Bay Area is the cooperation between state, federal, and regional parks, where First Saturday, you have First Friday, they have First Saturday, they have events that are culturally appropriate, encourage families, often minorities, often folks from different countries. I'm fascinated in San Diego. There's quite an Afghan population, and we had testimony from one of the kids that got involved in a parks outreach program that his parents didn't want him to go into something that would take him outside, because outside is not safe. That's their culture. And yet they were impressed that he was in the program, he was getting better grades, and he was got a job as a nature guide and was taking leadership. So his parents got interested. He was very excited because it was the first time last month that he had taken them camping. His mom and dad had agreed to go camping and stay outside. And they're from Afghanistan. You don't do that. And but he said it changed their lives, because they saw what was available in nature. So there's all kinds of things like this. So parks are reaching out to touch those kind of people, and that's, I think, an important part.
Does your commission have a relationship with the California State Park Foundation?
A very close one. Rebecca and I are members and have been for some time. I would guess many of you are. The foundation was, for those of you who may not know, was started by William Penn Mott, who was actually a director here in East Bay Regional Parks, just a phenomenal presence in state parks and then in national parks. And he felt there needed to be a support group for parks. And the foundation has kind of evolved into a support group, and it supports some of the friends groups, but it's more an advocacy group, and it's become much more involved in legislation. And unfortunately, during the crisis, it got into a difficult relationship with the Parks Department, and they were almost adversarial. Parks management felt that the foundation was not supportive. So it's been a kind of a tense situation that we have, and in our report, you will see, we address it. We say, Parks Foundation has done great things, but we need something that does different things, that can really just be there to support specific capital projects like information technology or marketing, or things that the department can't do on its own, but an organization with a separate nonprofit board could be more nimble at acquiring things that parks needs to do. And right now we're focused on information technology and marketing, both things that government by its nature just doesn't do very well. So let's focus on that and this new entity. And that's not something the foundation is set or geared to do. They do a lot of wonderful work, and they will be part of whatever dialogue or partnership that comes out. Excuse me. Forget that. Amplify that.
Are you recruiting students as volunteers, and what kind of training do they need?
We want to get back to doing that. It hasn't been happening. It used to be a great way to start as a student, as a volunteer, and then up through the system. That is one of the things it calls for in our report, is to do more of that. There has not typically been the funding, and actually a lot of park professionals volunteer for 10 or 12 years before they get a chance to get an entry-level job. And one of the things our report calls for is to accelerate that and make it faster, a clearer path for people that want to get involved and start as students.
Is there any fracking going on in state parks?
Better not be. I think that would, in the current situation, no, not that I know of. Although I would tell you, at one of our public hearings, somebody suggested that as a funding process, and they were booed down. So, but no, it's illegal to do any kind of extraction in a state park. So, although we have a good portion of the nation's marijuana supply coming out of national and state parks, I was with Congressman Huffman yesterday, and he represents his congressional district goes from Marin County to Humboldt County, and the senator that I used to work for in Marin had that same district. And he was ticking off all the things, that they're number one in, and he says, and my district provides 65% of the nation's marijuana. But interesting enough, and we were talking about water problems, again, back to water, those illegal grows are really causing a problem up on the North Coast, and they're affecting the salmon run. They're putting pesticides in the water. They're taking the water that should be flowing down. And quite honestly, to deal with marijuana, that's one of our biggest challenges, is what is going on out in the middle of nowhere that is really affecting the health of our forests and our parks. So it's something, hopefully, I think that's probably the biggest reason to address the marijuana issue, is because we are really in crisis in the North Coast.
Okay, well, that was our last question, and we thank you very much. It's been extremely interesting, and